Hey guys, I'm Eric with Extreme Terrain. Today we're checking out the Mammoth 2-inch suspension lift with shocks for all 2018 and later Jeep Wrangler JLs. Now you should really be checking this kit out if you want to easily tackle some moderate off-roading as well as fit some larger tires on your Jeep. This Jeep rolled in here on 255/70 all-terrain tires, and that basically equates to a 32-inch tire. And we were very easily able to step it up to 33-inch tires, and right now as it sits next to me, it has 35s on it. And actually when we turned the 35s in the wheel wells, we didn't get any rubbing whatsoever. Now if you have like a sport model Jeep that has the additional trim piece that's between the bumper and the fender, you might get a little rubbing in there, but if you remove that, you shouldn't have any problems at all. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned moderate off-roading, and why did I say moderate off-roading as opposed to more extreme off-roading? Well, remember, this is only a 2-inch lift. It's not a more extreme lift, so you're not getting a whole lot more room for articulating your suspension. And if you are gonna test the limits of this lift kit, I would actually recommend maybe a 33-inch tire or maybe something slightly larger. I don't know that I would go all the way to the 35s that we have on the Jeep right now. If you are gonna be flexing that suspension on some ruts, some uneven trails, what have you, these tires might rub up inside the wheel wells, maybe cause some uncomfortable bouncing when it hits the bump stops as well. But if you're only gonna do some light to moderate off-roading or mainly on-road driving with 35s, I don't think you'll have any problem whatsoever, actually. Now, this is a fairly inclusive kit. Not only do you get springs and new shocks, both front and rear, you have bump stops on front and rear also that are gonna prevent your tires from impacting inside the wheel wells. And those springs are quite a bit longer than your factory springs, and that's where all that additional ride height is coming from. It might make it a little bit more challenging during the installation phase, but you are going to notice a drastic improvement in ride quality as well as that additional height that you're looking for. Also included in this kit, which is something that's fairly common for lift kits, are the longer sway bar end links. There are nice quality fittings on those, and it'll accommodate your sway bar just fine. The other nice thing about this kit is it includes lower control arms with greasable Heim joints. And that is basically the rotating, articulating joint that's going to mount up to the frame end of the lower control arm in the front of the Jeep. It's a nice, beefy, quality component there, and that's going to be able to allow your suspension to articulate just a little bit more without any harshness in the action as you're going down the trails. The other nice feature about these lower control arms in the front is that they are adjustable, and that's going to help make sure that you have proper angles with your suspension and with your axle. So we do recommend that once you get this installed, you do take it for a professional alignment. That is one of the things that a professional alignment shop is going to adjust and check to make sure that pinion angles and all of that with your axle are proper, and you're not going to have any funny handling scenarios when you're out on the road. Now, as you'll see a little bit later in this video when we do our side-by-side comparison, when we take our factory components off, and I'm going to put them up on the table and show you side-by-side the factory shock versus your new Mammoth shocks, you're going to notice a really big difference between the new Mammoth shocks and the old factory ones. These new units are quite a bit beefier, and I'm talking about all the way around. As far as the oil reservoir is quite a bit beefier, and it's holding a lot more oil in there, and that's going to provide better heat dissipation and better resistance as you go down the road. These shocks aren't going to fade if you put them to heavy use. Your factory units are going to fade a lot sooner. The other way they're also a lot beefier is in the piston rod. These have hardened chrome piston rods that are thicker diameter than your factory shocks. Again, altogether, looking at it as a package, you're going to take a lot more abuse than your factory units. For this fairly comprehensive kit, guys, the price right now is right around $1,300. That's pretty competitive considering all the components that we're replacing here and all the added functionality and capability that you're going to be giving to your Jeep. Now, as far as the installation goes, it's a very solid 2 out of 3 wrenches on our difficulty meter. Give yourself about 6 hours time at least to get this installed. And I don't know whether I recommend this for a novice or a beginner. This is a bit of a challenging install, and the biggest challenge was actually in the rear end area where we had to droop the axle quite a bit to get those longer springs into place. Now, if you can't accommodate that with the equipment you have at home, the jack stands and a floor jack, you might want to think twice about trying to start this job at home and maybe take it to a shop instead. All right, guys, so enough of me talking. Let's take a look at the tools we're going to use and go ahead with the installation. All right, guys, tools you're going to see in this installation include both an electric and pneumatic impact gun, a pneumatic ratcheting wrench, a hand socket wrench, 10, 18, and 19 millimeter crescent wrenches, a swivel socket, 8, 10, 18, 19, 21, and 24 millimeter sockets, a 6 millimeter Allen key socket, a pair of vice grips, trim removal tool, a pair of extensions, a pry bar, an adjustable crescent wrench, and a pair of pliers. All right guys, now we're about to get started. At this point of the install, if you're doing this at home, you're gonna be using jack stands and a floor jack most likely, and you need to make sure that your Jeep is safely supported with good sturdy jack stands, and the floor jack you're gonna wanna position underneath the differential to raise and lower the axle as needed. Because eventually we're gonna disconnect a few things, droop the axle so we can get the springs out, and also this kit includes lower control arms as well, so we're gonna be replacing those. So just make sure your Jeep is good and solidly supported before you get underneath it for safety's sake. So let's go ahead and get started. All right guys, first we're gonna take out the lower bolt here for our driver's side sway bar end link using 18 millimeter tool on both sides here. And then we're gonna repeat this on the other side so we can droop the sway bar to get the top one out. All right, once you've taken off the bottom bolt on the other side, you can pull your sway bar down and give us some more room to work here. Again, this is 18 millimeter, and if your bolt starts to spin inside there, we're gonna have to figure out a different way to use a wrench and an Allen key, but we're gonna try it like this and see if we can get it off. Go ahead and repeat that on the other side. All right guys, we're up here at the top of the front driver's side shock, and you're gonna need 18 millimeter socket to get this out. It's a captured nut on the back side, so you don't have to worry about a tool on the other side. And get it kind of wedged up in there. You should be able to do this without having to cut away your wheel well liner. All right guys, now if it's a little stubborn coming out, go ahead and grab the open end of your wrench here, put it up there, and then pull outward as you are backing the bolt out. All right guys, now we're gonna do the bottom bolt here. 18 millimeter tools on both sides. You're gonna need a socket over here and a wrench in here. And just be aware that when this bolt comes out, there's nothing holding your shock up, so kind of push in on the bolt and take the nut off first, then you can use your other hand to grab the shock. And this might be obvious guys, I just want to make sure I mentioned it, is at this point make sure your axle is adequately supported. We obviously have some pull jacks in here because we're using a lift today. So if you have jack stands underneath your frame, go ahead and get your floor jack underneath your axle at this time. Now next we're going to remove this bracket here that helps secure the brake lines to the lower control arm. And you're going to need a 15 millimeter socket to undo this nut right here. All right guys, now we're going to go after this bolt right here. You're gonna need a 10 millimeter socket for this, and once we do that, this bracket will come loose, and then just to give us more slack here as we droop the axle, we're not gonna put any tension on our brake lines. That's why we're doing that. All right guys, now everything we've done up to this point you can repeat on the passenger side as well. And now we're going to disconnect the breather tube here on the top of the differential. Just a pinch pin right here. All right guys, now if your Jeep is equipped with the locking differential setup here, we're going to have to disconnect this wiring harness as well as the lock pins that are kind of holding the wire to the upper part of that switch unit, and then there's another one up here attaching it to the bracket where the upper control arm meets the axle. So first off, let's get this, pry that lock pin back so you can now pinch it and then pull back. And up here, you can use a longer flathead screwdriver or a trim removal tool, like the one I have, if you have one. It comes out just like that. And there's another one up top here. And that way, this wire is not at all connected to our axle, so when we droop it, we don't have to worry about putting any stress or tension on it. All right guys, now we're gonna take our track bar bolt out here. You're gonna need a 21mm socket for that. All right, now with the track bar disconnected, we're gonna start drooping the axle so we can get our factory springs out. All right guys, now we've drooped the axle. We should be able to get our spring out. And we'll get our passenger side one out as well. All right guys, now that we have our factory sway bar end links and springs off of the Jeep, I wanted to show you real quick up here in the table, a quick side-by-side comparison with our new springs and sway bar end links. Now obviously, not a whole lot to point out here, springs versus springs, except obvious length. This is where all our additional ride height is going to be coming from with our new spring from Mammoth. And down here, longer sway bar end links. One design difference I want to point out with those is that for cinching up the top portion there, instead of having a nut on like a bolt inside there that has a hex key inside the bolt, in case that starts spinning, you're going to need to secure those with two tools like that to wrench it down. Sometimes it gets a little bit awkward. This new sway bar end link actually just has a bolt going through here, so you can put a tool on this side while you're cinching down the nut on here, and it's a nylon lock nut here. It's going to keep that nice and secure for you. Otherwise, it's pretty much a standard comparison. Beefy components here from Mammoth, but really what we're looking at here is the additional length for that ride height. So let's go ahead and get them installed. All right guys, now droop the axle as far as you can. You should be able to get it down far enough, not have to do anything else. If for whatever reason you droop it and you line your spring up in here and you can't get the spring in, you've got two options. You can compress your spring or you can remove the skid plate and reinforcement bar that's underneath the drive shaft, because it's probably your drive shaft coming down on top of that up there. And that'll give you a little bit more room to drop even lower. But we should have enough room here. Let's get it started up top. Now make sure you have your new bump stop extension that's included in the kit inside the spring already. You won't be able to get it through the coils once we get it up on there. And make sure that your isolator up top here is seated properly. And on the other side, make sure that the end of the coil is wrapping around into the stop of the isolator on the bottom of the spring. We're gonna grab a flange nut out of the new Mammoth kit here and feed it up underneath and get it threaded on. Get it started. And then you're gonna need to get a wrench up in here to secure that nut, and you're gonna need a 6mm Allen key socket or an Allen key itself to go down through the hole here. That's an Allen bolt on the inside there. I have a handy tool here from using other lift kits that can help me get up underneath there. You can either try a wrench, or if you have a ratcheting wrench that has a foldable end to get up in there. All right guys, now of course go ahead and install your passenger side spring and bump stop over on the other side as well. So So now we're going to work on our lower control arms. You're going to need a 21 mil socket here on the bolt side. If you are using a specific tool on the other side, on the nut, you're going to need 24 millimeter over there, but I'm using an adjustable crescent wrench. All right, now we left the bolt in up top there just to have it something to hold it up. And same size tools down here on the bottom end. All right guys, now we just got our lower control arm off the Jeep, I want to throw up here on the table real quick and give you a nice side-by-side comparison with the new control arm from Mammoth. Now obviously there's a pretty huge difference here, and that is the fact that your Mammoth lower control arm is adjustable. And basically up here, it's threaded, and just by spinning it out like that, you're lengthening the control arm. The reason why that's important is because with a lift kit, with the droop from the axle, and you have more separation between the body of the Jeep and the axle of your Jeep, because of the geometry and the way it bends down, it's actually going to cause the center of your wheels and tires to be off center a little bit and tuck in a little bit closer to the rear part of the wheel well on your Jeep. And that's just the way the geometry works. And to account for that, you have this control arm here that you can lengthen out and will kind of push that offset back, so it'll help keep your wheels and tires centered within the wheel well. And so when you have up and down travel, it is going to lower the chance that it's going to rub or come in contact with anything, especially if you upsize your tires as well, which is one of the main things that people do with their lift kits. So basically, you would spin this out, and then you have this nut here that spins back down and will lock it in place. Now, according to the manufacturer, they tell us that what they recommend you do is you take your factory lower control arm, and we're going to take a measurement here from the center of where the bolt goes through on one end to the center of where the bolt goes through on the other end. Get that measurement, whatever that distance is, we are going to duplicate that with the lower control arm. Now you're probably asking yourself, why are we doing that? You just said the whole reason we need these is to be longer. Well, they tell you to set it that way because we also recommend that you take your Jeep in for a professional alignment after you have a lift kit installed. You want to make sure that everything's properly aligned, both laterally as well as making sure your steering is properly aligned as well. We always recommend that after you do a lift kit. That's for safe handling of your vehicle, and it's also to keep the long life of your tires so you don't have anything rubbing incorrectly there and kind of prematurely wearing out your tires. The other nice thing about these lower control arms is this fitting here is greasable. It has a fitting right here. So that will also keep longer life with the fittings here, and it's just a beefier, if you compare them side by side, they're just beefier fittings, and it's gonna be a lot more rugged and durable if you're out there pounding on the trails as well. Other than that, just line it up. This brass colored end here goes up to the body, and this will be down by our axle. If you notice the slight bend here, we're matching it up to the one that we just removed from the driver's side. So you have that little post there, and that's where you're gonna reattach the bracket that secures the brake lines. So basically line it up, and that's how you know which lower control arm goes on which side. So let's go ahead and get it installed. All right guys, now we're gonna start a bolt here up top. You're gonna want to, once you figure out how far out you need to undo this end, you're gonna want it so your grease fitting is gonna be facing down so you can access it. If you have it up top, you probably won't be able to access it because of the shape of the bracket. Just something to keep in mind. All right, now we're gonna bring the bottom up. You might have to wiggle your axle a little bit to get it in. And we're gonna start these nuts and bolts here, and we're gonna tighten them down a little bit, but we don't wanna fully tighten them until the vehicle is down on its own weight. All right guys, like I said, we're gonna snug these up, but not tighten fully. There are torque specs, and all this is gonna need to be torqued to those specs that come in the instruction booklet from Mammoth. Then go ahead and repeat this and install your lower control arm on the passenger side. All right guys, with our factory shock off the Jeep, I wanted to throw up here on the table and give you a quick comparison side by side with our new shock absorber from Mammoth. Now obviously the body is much larger. You're gonna have a lot more fluid in there that's gonna really assist in provide better dampening with a lot harder work out there in the trails. As you're exercising your Jeep suspension with a lot of travel up and down, as you go over uneven terrain or obstacles, that puts a lot of stress on your shock absorbers and they start building up heat. Now, the more shock oil you have in there, the longer it's going to take for that to get heated up. And the other thing about this is the construction of these. This is an aluminum bodied shock, so it's going to dissipate that heat faster than the steel bodied shocks that come as part of the base kit on your Jeep from the factory. The other thing you're going to notice too is that the shaft here coming down to the other end is a lot beefier than what you get in your factory shock, so it's going to take a lot more punishment as well. And overall, it's just kind of an attractive unit. We're going to go ahead and get it mounted up in the Jeep. The one thing you're going to notice if you're looking at the set of 4 that comes with this kit, the way you can tell the difference between the front and the rear is that the 2 shocks for the front have an equal size bushing or metal sleeve up here up top, and it's going to be even on both sides. There's a little bit more of an offset with the shocks that go on the rear, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. I just wanted to point that out because you need to know which ones go on the front at this point of the install. Like I said, the shocks on the rear, this metal sleeve up here is going to be offset more. Those are for the back end, so go ahead and grab these and let's get them installed. All right guys, we trimmed just a little bit of our wheel well liner back to make it a little bit easier. Let's go ahead and lift your shock up into place. Using the factory bolt, and we're going to tighten it down with an 18mm socket. All right guys, now we're going to raise our axle back up so we can get our shock lined up. All right, now we're going to tighten this bolt up. Again, it's a 18mm tool on both sides. All right, now go ahead and grab the factory bolt. We're going to resecure this bracket here. It's holding our brake lines. And I'm cinching it down right now just by hand. It's a little tight working in here using a 10mm socket. Once we get it snugged up, I'll see if I can get my wrench in here and we'll tighten it down. All right guys, now we're going to reattach our factory bracket here using the factory hardware. And use a 15mm socket to tighten it down. And you can repeat that on the other side as well. All right guys, now we're going to put in our new Mammoth sway bar end links. You're going to use the shorter ones on the front, the longer ones are for the back. We're going to use the new bolt, flat washer, and lock nut up top. And it's a lock nut, so you're only going to be able to get it on so far by hand. Then we're going to use our factory bolt down below. And you can get this started on the other side, and then we'll grab some tools and we'll tighten them down. All right guys, now to tighten up the hardware that's supplied in the kit, on the bolt side it's 18mm, but for the lock nut you're going to need a 19mm socket for that side. And to tighten up our factory stuff, again, it's 18mm tools on both sides for this one. Okay, at this point, guys, go ahead and reattach the sway bar end link on the other side. And for us, we are working on a lift here, so we're not going to tighten down the bolts for the lower control arm or at both ends of the shock or the track bar. Now, if you're doing this at home and you're lifting one end at a time, go ahead and put your wheels and tires back on and lower your Jeep to the ground. Once it's on its own weight, then you can tighten up those fittings and reattach the wiring harness for your diff lock. So all that has to be done while it's down on its own weight. We can't really do it right now because it's too extended and there's not enough slack in the line, and I don't want to remove all the extra locking pins, and that is going to create too much slack. So we're going to wait till our Jeep is back under its own weight to do that. You can do that now if you're lowering this end and raising up the rear end. So for the purpose of the video, however, we are done here at the front and we're going to move to the back. All right, now once you have your Jeep lifted and supported safely with jack stands, and again, using your floor jack underneath your differential, we're gonna go ahead and get started. First off, we're gonna work on our end links here, get those removed, and then we'll go from there. All right, for the bottom of the end link here, we're gonna have 18mm tools on both sides. Then repeat that on the other side, and then we'll go after the top. All right, again, you're gonna need 18mm socket up top here. If you have a newer Jeep like we have, that we're working on today, lower mileage, things might be a little stiffer, you can just use a socket on here. If these are a little bit more worn out, higher mileage Jeep you're working on, you're probably gonna need an open-ended wrench like this and an Allen socket in there, but we're gonna give this a try, see if it works. All right, guys, repeat those steps and remove the end link on the passenger side. Now we're gonna remove this cover here so we can access the top bolt for our shock absorber. You're gonna need an 8mm socket for these 3 bolts right here. All right, guys, at this point we moved our pull jacks into place. We have our axle supported. Now we're going to remove our shock absorbers. Up top here, you're gonna need 18mm socket. All right, leaving the bolt up top there just to hold the shock up, we're gonna undo the bottom one here, 18mm tool on both sides. All right, guys, now what you're gonna have to do next is set your parking brake, and what that does is it pulls this parking brake cable this way, and it pulls this little pin right here inbound or inward towards the center of your vehicle. With the parking brake set, then get a clamp or a vice grip like we have here and pinch down on this little pin right here, and that's going to hold it and prevent it from sliding back in. It's spring loaded in there. So with the parking brake set, clamp that down, and then release the parking brake. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna give you slack on your cable right here so you can pull this out. Now with this out, I'll show you what we're gonna do next. All right, next, there's this clip right here that has these prongs that stick out and prevent the cable from sliding back through this bracket. What you need to do is pinch those little prongs down. What I'm doing with my left hand here is I'm pulling and keeping tension on the cable. You pull it out like that. What that's going to do is prevent this cable from binding up and preventing our axle from dropping as far as we need it to get the spring up. Go ahead and do that on the other side. All right, guys, now using a 21mm socket, we are going to take out the bolt here that connects our track bar to the axle. And it has a flag nut on the back side. All right, guys, now go ahead and remove your springs. All right, guys, now we have the rear spring, shock, and sway bar end link removed from the Jeep. Again, a little side-by-side comparison. Pretty much the comparison is going to be what I described on the front end as well. You got this beefier shock here from Mammoth with the aluminum body. It's going to dissipate heat better. We're talking about a longer spring and longer sway bar end link. The only added component we're going to have on the rear end is this bump stop block that's going to sit up on top of the pedestal that's on top of the axle as it is. We're going to bolt that down. It's pretty simple, probably the easiest part of the installation. So pretty much that's what you have. The comparison, like we did on the front end, it's pretty much the same. You got beefier, better quality components going in on the rear end, just like you did on the front end. So let's go ahead and continue. All right, guys, now we're going to reinstall our brand new spring. And just be mindful that you got it coil all the way up into the perch up top and properly seated on the bottom as well. You can see where the coil ends there, guys. You're going to want to kind of twist it around so that it meets up with that little notch in your rubber isolator. And then go ahead and repeat this on the other side. All right, guys, grab one of the spacer blocks out of your kit and set it up here in the pedestal using the bolts and nuts from the kit. Get started. All right, guys, now on the bolt you need a 10mm wrench, and for the nut you'd need a 13mm, or ½ inch would also work. Repeat that on the other side. All right, guys, now we have our bump stop spacer blocks installed. Next thing we need to do is get our shocks put in place and also put in our new sway bar end links. Now, as I was trying to compress the axle up, compress the springs a little bit with our pull jacks, I was noticing that the more I tried to do that, we started getting to the point where we were starting to get the Jeep up off of our lift, which is not a safe condition. And you might experience that too if you were trying to raise your axle with your floor jack, and you might end up lifting your Jeep up off of the jack stands, which means your springs aren't really compressing too much more. So what we're gonna do in order to compress it enough so that we can get both points of attachment bolted up for our shocks and for our sway bar end links is we're gonna lower the Jeep down onto its own weight, get the tires back on, and that should hopefully compress our springs enough that we can get these into place. So to get started, I'm going to get the top bolt going for our shocks so that that's already mounted as we gently bring it down and hopefully compress it up enough that we can line up the lower bolt hole with the bracket here and get the bottom bolt started for the shocks. So let's go ahead. All right, guys, just remember with these rear shocks here that this little bit of space needs to go to the inside. That started. Give you a few turns with our impact here, but we don't want to tighten it up too much. That's good. It's nice and up there, nice and solid, but we can still move this as we need to. Yeah, as you can see here, we have a few inches to make up. So hopefully when we get down on its own weight and compress this up a little bit, we can line up this with this So go ahead and get your other shock started as well. All right guys, now we're back down on the ground here. If you're obviously working on jack stands and with a floor jack, you're a lot closer to the ground than we were on our lift. But now that we're down on the ground, we're able to gently get the lift into position, and as you can see, under its own weight, the springs compress more, and we can get a bolt in here. Now with that started, down here, that's gonna help keep the axle up. We'll put it back up in the air so we can do our sway bar end links up in the air. So let's go ahead and bolt up the other side. All right, now get your sway bar end link in here. We have the new bolt, flat washer, and nylon lock nut up top here. Then get the other one started as well, and then we'll do the bottom bolt. All right guys, now we're gonna tighten up the top bolt here. You're gonna need a 19 millimeter for this brand new nylon lock nut here, and just an 18 on the bolt side. Now to the bottom here, we're using factory hardware, so it's 18 millimeter tools on both sides. And then repeat over on the passenger side. Now we're tightening up the bottom bolt here for our shock. 18 millimeter tools on both sides. Tighten up the top bolt, again 18 millimeter tool, and I got a swivel socket here because of this pinch weld here. And then repeat for the shock on the other side. All right guys, now get your track bar back up here lined up, and your factory bolt back through here, and your flag nut on the back side. Now this might be a little tricky because of the lift and the geometry change. It might not line up perfectly. If that's the case for you, get a pry bar or a long breaker bar, something with some leverage. Put it up here, up on the inside of the frame rail and up against the side of the bracket, and pull to the right on that as you are pushing the bolt. And if you kind of do that simultaneously, it'll be just enough to get the bolt through. So once you have that bolt in there, go ahead and tighten it down. Make sure the flag nut is attached on the back side. And again, we're using a 21 millimeter on this bolt. And then before you call it done, make sure you're tightening this and the other bolts that we've been working on to spec. All right guys, now replace the cover here that we removed to access our shock absorber. Again, we're using an 8 millimeter socket to tighten up these little trim bolts. And go ahead and repeat this on the other side. All right guys, now we're underneath the truck and we're looking at the track bar where it connects to the axle. I have the original track bar bolt here, and I have a friend in the driver's seat who, when I tell him to go, is going to start turning the wheel. And as he does that, that'll hopefully help line up the track bar with the bracket here. We can get the bolt in. So go ahead. All right guys, now we have the bolt in there. I'm holding the flag nut with my left hand on the back side. I'm just gonna give this bolt a couple turns until we get it started. Now we have it started. Grab your 21 millimeter socket and we're gonna tighten this up. Once you have that good and tight, then don't forget you're gonna have to torque this down to the spec according to your owner's manual. And on our front axle here, guys, don't forget to reconnect the wiring harness for your locking differential if your Jeep is equipped with it. And plug that in so it clicks, and then push in the lock tab. All right, guys, now don't forget to reconnect your front axle breather tube. All right, guys, just a couple of quick cleanup items now that we're done. Make sure that you torque all the fittings that you touched as part of this install to specifications provided by the manufacturer. I also recommend that after a couple hundred miles of driving your Jeep with your new lift kit on it, that you recheck all the fittings and make sure nothing has come loose. And we also recommend getting a professional alignment done anytime that you've had any suspension or steering work done to your vehicle. So that pretty much wraps up this review and install of this Mammoth 2-inch suspension lift with shocks, fitting all 2018 and later Jeep Wrangler JLs. And of course, for all things Wrangler, keep it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.